ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
When a boat carrying Chinese men arrived in Western Australia last month, it was unusual, not only because it's rare for boats to make it to the mainland, but those on board are almost never from China. So, what's happening? Today, ABC reporter Kuang on her investigation. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Wing, that Chinese nationals are boarding boats to Australia is fascinating for so many reasons, and we're going to unpack with you what is going on. To get a good understanding of it, you spoke to 3 men who undertook that perilous journey here. They're now in detention in Nauru, but they stepped you through that boat journey. Just tell me about that. What did they say?
Yes, Sam, it's really fascinating to see Chinese nationals taking boat to Australia. They told me that it took them 8 days to come to Australia from Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia. They specifically waited till the sundown so that no one could see their boat.
3月29号晚上开始出发，然后
It was an 8-day journey with storms and winds coming through. And I spoke to Zhang, which is not his real name, and he says they faced so many problems during that 8-day journey.
对我们的中间的经历的事情就是我们的这个船发动机就坏了，然后
He told me that during the trip, they encountered very strong winds. The boat was a wooden boat, and he said they had 2 engines broken down, and the water pump on the boat also broke down.
So that's one of the Chinese nationals who was on board that boat. There were 10 altogether, and my gosh, the story is terrifying. So the boat's engines on the way here from Indonesia actually break down, and there's these strong winds, and really, they don't think they're going to survive, right?
Exactly. And one man actually told me that he took out his phone at that time and started to draft a message to his family.
那个时候想的就是手机里编辑一段信息。
He told me that he wrote down that he was very sorry to his family for being very busy at work for all these years. And the reason why he did so was because he thought that maybe one day this phone would be on the beach or being discovered by someone, and someone would know their story.
的时候可能会看到这个信息，就类似于遗书这感觉吧。
All right, so that's Lee. That's another Chinese national who was on this boat. So it takes 8 days to get here from Indonesia to Australia, and it's a journey, Wing, that so many asylum seekers have attempted before after paying sometimes huge amounts of money to people smugglers. Is that what they did too?
Yes, and they were charged around 10,000 Australian dollars, and they were not told about the truth of coming to Australia via boat. They were told that there were only 2 possibilities if you took the boat to Australia. One is that you will got intercepted by the Australian Border Force and you were forced to return. And the second one was that you would be very lucky and you can landing in Australia safely and you can apply for a visa. But that's not what happened when you take a boat to Australia, because for the past decades, Australia have been taking a very strict border control, especially for boat arrivals. There's been policies that if you come by boat, you will never ever be able to enter Australia and you will get sent to possibly an offshore immigration detention center. And that's where these men ended up going to.
All right. Now, you do note that the ABC can't independently verify what these men have told you, but their stories are really consistent with each other's. Now, Wing, as we said before, what's really intriguing about this is it's highly unusual for Chinese nationals to try to get to Australia by boat. It's almost unheard of. What did they tell you? Why are they fleeing China and trying to get here this way?
Yes, these men, they do share a similar story. They found it really difficult to survive in China. Since the COVID-19 pandemic began, China implemented a really draconian COVID-0 lockdown, and it was not lifted until the end of 2022 when there was a nationwide protest against all these really strict measures. And two of these three men that I spoke to, they ran small businesses in China. During COVID, because of the lockdowns, they couldn't really run their business. They ran out of money. And as a result, they were kind of left with debts. And even now, the lockdowns were lifted. The economy recovery in China was just so slow that they couldn't pay their debt back. And also remember, in China, everything is political. For example, one reason why China continued implementing COVID-19 lockdowns at that time was because the Chinese President Xi Jinping wanted to maintain his political legacy in controlling the pandemic. And during this time, many activists and citizen journalists were arrested for speaking out what was happening on the ground in neighborhoods that were under lockdown.
之前也是做生意的，因为大环境的原因，这个亏了很多外债。然后
Lee told me that the life in China is too stressful with limited freedom, and that's why he tried to come to Australia, which he says is humane and free.
澳大利亚也算是一个人道主义国家，而且比较自由。
And Wing, they aren't the only Chinese nationals who've tried something similar in recent months, right, to get to Australia. What has the ABC found out there?
In fact, we have found at least 3 groups of Chinese nationals trying to come to Australia via Indonesia by boat since March, and only one boat made it. The latest one that we have found out was on May the 8th. These boats were intercepted by Indonesian police when they were still in Indonesia. And the Indonesian police arrested smugglers not just from China and Indonesia, but also from Bangladesh. And they have found out that the social media, especially Chinese social media, TikTok, play a particular role in advertising all these smuggling service to these Chinese men.
So, Wing, that's what we're seeing here in Australia. But really interestingly, it's also happening at a much larger scale in the United States, right? Tell me about the walking route from Mexico and how Chinese nationals are now being found on that too.
This is a migration route that's often taken by Latino Americans from the Central America who try to enter the United States via an illegal migration pathway. But since the end of 2021, when China was still in COVID-19 lockdown, there has been a rise of Chinese nationals traveling a long way from their home to Mexico to walk on this route to enter the southern border. I talked to Tracy Wenliu, who is an award-winning journalist with The Voice of America. She has been documenting what's been happening on the U.S. borders in the past 2 years.
Usually they fly out from China to Hong Kong or Macau, and then they took a plane to Turkey. And then they fly from Turkey to Ecuador because you don't need a visa to go to Ecuador if you have a Chinese passport. And then from Ecuador, a lot of them walk past by a dozen countries to reach the southern border of the states, which means the border between U.S. and Mexico. And then they would come across the border, and then they would present themselves to the border patrol in the States.
And Wing, this route is seriously dangerous, isn't it? They're really risking their lives to get into America via this route.
It is. And when you walk up to Mexico, you have to walk through a jungle called Darien Gap. And similar to the Australian situation, this route has been publicly advertised and documented on many Chinese social media, such as Douyin, which is the Chinese version of TikTok.
Wing, let's come back now to what's happening here. The Chinese nationals you spoke to, as we mentioned, are now being processed on Nauru. Australian officials, they just want them to go home, right? They've offered them $7,500 Australian dollars and a return ticket if they agree to go back to China. So will they accept that? Will they go?
One of the 10 men Fang I have talked to, he has chosen to return to where he worked. However, the other men I talked to, they do feel there could be a risk for them to go back to China. Many of these men also had a really young child, and they were also the motivation of why these men take such a big risk to come to Australia, because they felt that if they could make it to Australia, then somehow in the end they could also take their kids to Australia and let their kids to have a better future with better education and in a much safer, freer environment. Lee has been on the phone with his wife in the past few weeks since he was taken to Nauru, but he's been very worried about speaking to his kid because he said his kid was still very young.
不敢跟他说话，因为说的多了怕控制不住。
And he was worried that he would get really emotional and teary when he spoke to the child.
All right, well, the Department of Home Affairs says people who've attempted to travel to Australia by boat without a valid Australian visa have zero chance of settling in Australia. So that's its message. The government wing, I would think, would be on high alert now for more Chinese nationals trying to make this journey to Australia.
I think compared to the majority of how Chinese nationals coming into Australia, coming by boat is still a really rare and extreme choice. Now, in both the United States and Australia, we have seen a trend of Chinese nationals opting for illegal migration pathways to leave the country. And last year in the United States, there were 37,000 Chinese nationals being arrested on the southern borders as they tried to enter the country illegally. So for Australian government, that might send a signal to them.
All right, Wing, thank you so much for your reporting.
Thank you so much, Sam. My pleasure.
Wing Kuang is a reporter at the ABC. This episode was produced by Jess O'Callaghan and Bridget Fitzgerald, with audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. To get in touch with the team, please email us on ABC News Daily at abc.net.au. Thanks for listening.